Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining this webinar this afternoon. I'm Shane Barry and I'm a concept advisor here at Space Store Healthcare. So to give a brief intro before we dive into today's topic around unlocking the potential of smart hospitals and what lies ahead, just wanted to give a bit of background to Space Store, who we are, and the webinar series we're running. So to give a bit of background, Space Store is a creator of architectural space-defining furniture. It's a blend of California cool London design, and I'm streaming in from our London design centre in one of our products that we've been working on with the healthcare environment as well. So we've learned from our engagement with some of the world's most successful leading companies, so the likes of Google, Pfizer, Roche Diagnostics, how to help them change their workplace dynamics and make sure workflows through the space work, transforming and change management. And it's on the back of this that we've really engaged with the healthcare market through our corporate work, and really, I guess, driven through the back of COVID in the background of our pods and booths and the increase in virtual consultancy within healthcare environments, and our products being a solution solver to the distractions in the workplace. So today's topic was really to dive into what may lie ahead in the transformation, and particularly looking at smart hospitals. So just before we dive further into that topic, would like to introduce the panelists, and just to mention that as we go through this webinar, I'd like to invite any questions in the Q&A or chat box, ping them in and we'll field them to the panel as we go along, whether that's on LinkedIn or on the team. So thanks again for joining. First, I'd like to introduce Moritz. If you want to introduce yourself, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Shane, to inviting me along. Yeah, my name is Moritz Bellenberg. I'm an associate director with Lubin & Davies. I've been a healthcare architect for 20 years, both working in Europe, the UK, and international, and more recently also I've been involved in the overall development of hospital developments, looking at the different ways of smart technology, incorporating smart technologies, and the benefits in particular to the design.
Good. Thank you very much, Moritz. Dwayne, over to you. If you could briefly introduce yourself, please.
Thank you very much, Shane. I'm Dwayne Passman. I've been involved in healthcare programs and projects as a healthcare planner and program leader for just over 37 years now. And last year I set up my own consultancy, Percipio Consulting, and I am the director and owner of that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Very excited to have you both on the panel today, and it's going to be an exciting discussion. So, as I mentioned, I'm Shane, and a concept advisor here at Space Store Healthcare. So, my main work has been working with NHS trusts and architects and designers on mainly the outpatient transformation program in terms of using our products to help solve the virtual consultancy uptake and the need for private confidential spaces for doing video calls, etc. So without further ado, let's hop on to today's topic. So as I mentioned, today's topic is unlocking the potential of smart hospitals and what lies ahead. So I think it's quite an exciting but broad topic here. And I think it's really stemmed from the fact that we know the problems we've had in healthcare over the years, and how obviously COVID has accelerated some changes. And I think we wanted to dive into what could lie ahead with smart hospitals, and maybe to kick off, Moritz or Dwayne, if one of you want to jump in. I think we discussed about let's demystify what we mean by smart hospitals. So what are we actually talking about today?
Yes, I would probably start at taking a look back, just having an understanding. Obviously, these days everything appears to be smart. So everything that we have smart telephones, we have smart motorways, we have smart cars. I have a smart dishwasher which tells me via Bluetooth that my dishes are ready. Whether all of this is that smart in the end, I think it's to be looked at, and hopefully as part of this discussion. But just looking back, and I would actually put out here as an argument that a smart building is at any point in time is a building that utilizes the technology that's available at the time. So looking at the our more recent work in Greece, for example, in the healthcare sector, we looked a few thousand years back at the Asclepions, the healing temples. These were arguably smart buildings because they were carefully controlled environments that were conducive to healing. You look at the Roman architecture that utilized things like passive ventilation, passive cooling. These, with the technology of its time, were, in my opinion, smart buildings, utilizing smart technology. Now, looking where we are at the moment, smart hospitals has become a big focal point, and often it's not quite clear what exactly we're talking about. And I tend to, and I'm an architect. I come from the design perspective, so I'll be looking at what smart technology can do for my work, for what benefits can we realize. But in terms of a smart building, the way I tend to best describe it is different layers of technology, and certainly these days smart buildings are digital platforms for data collection and data processing. So with that technology progressing and advancing, and arguably with the introduction of AI, I would say that we are looking at a roadmap ahead of us, which where buildings become more and more cleverer using AI. They become perhaps more clever than their building occupants, and that's obviously when we start maybe later looking at the pitfalls of all this is one of the aspects that we can look at. I certainly think from our own experience, having worked with some of the leading engineering consultants in internationally and in the UK, looking certainly the commercial sectors is leading the path. You mentioned some of your clients, Shane, in terms of Google, etc. I mean, certainly commercial buildings and higher education for some time has been looking into smart technology. Now, in terms of particular my field, our field is our hospitals, and in terms of a complexity ranking, I'd say everybody would probably agree that hospitals are quite up there and need to be smart and enabled to do certain things. Now, looking at the reality of it, and nobody needs to point that out. Our buildings are often still from the Victorian age, and in some areas in Europe where we have been involved in, they have one Windows 7 PC in the corner to access potentially patient data. But at its very best, I think healthcare systems that can become connected and that can implement a good digitally enabled hospital that in effect can save time, and I pretty much come from the angle of Mies van der Rohe. Less is more. These days less has to be more because there's less budget, there's less staff, there's less land to develop. So we need to look at technology that enables us to, quite frankly, build smaller hospitals, and I think this is in particular in the current context, NHP, etc., where obviously digital enabled hospitals is one important pillar. This is one of the key drivers where we see the potential. And just to take a simple example, I mean, we are still looking at clinical briefs that have a 60 square meter waiting area for 6 consulting rooms. My heart really sinks, because I think we can be better than that. We don't need to have everyone crammed into a waiting area. We can, with the right technology, hopefully schedule outpatient appointments, inpatient appointments, can, tell people when is your A&E busy. A lot of these things happen already, but we should see in real time how busy is the hospital? Do I need to go now? What's my appointment time? You can have these days. You have a McDonald's app which sees how far you're away from the hospital, from the restaurant, and they start preparing your order. Is this type of technology? Can this help to reduce the footprint of our hospitals? And that's really sort of the area where we're coming from. And obviously, looking at the different technology layers that make up a smart hospital, some of them are very important for sustainability, like the building management systems that interact with user occupancy and can switch on the light off and on, or switch the cooling off and on. So I think these are important technical aspects which will help us in the future to build more responsible buildings. But at the same time, I think where we work with consultants looking at digitally enabled electronic patient records, in particular, how we can make processes more efficient. And I'm just referring to, for example, CSSD, sterile services tracking devices, from the point of sterilization through into the operating theater. Again, can we benefit from this technology to actually reduce space demand in the hospital? And that really comes down for us as architects, not to have just smart technology for the sake of it, but really to provide a tangible benefit to its users. I'm probably gonna stop here and hand back, so we can maybe enter into look at different angles from here. But I'd certainly later on in the debate would like to revisit areas of what are the pitfalls of it, like do we alienate users, do we alienate people who are not that digitally enabled? But that's from me for now.
No, that's very good, and a lot of excellent points you brought in there. I think which we can probably expand on. No doubt, Dwayne, you've got some comments on your views on the topic.
Yes, thank you, Shane. Thank you, Moritz. Shane, in your introduction, you touched on the point around demystification of smart hospitals. So it's kind of what it means. It's ensuring that collectively we've got a common currency for what a smart hospital is. Now, that will not be a one-size-fits-all approach, because different organizations will have different digital maturity, and I hate this phrase, but on their journey to excellence in terms of digital enablement. But we need to be really, really clear about what we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve, and what it describes. Because otherwise, if I was still a client trying to explain this to my board, how would I do that? Because otherwise it comes out as a IT enabled word salad. And I would much prefer to see having a really, really clear vision and definition of what it is, and then what sits below that, below the strategic, tactical and operational, to make it a digital hospital in the context not only of that organization, but of that system, that health system. And I think that's quite an important point that I'll just return to briefly in a moment. So the only definition I can find is a smart hospital uses integrated data collection to aggregate and provide insights into increasing efficiencies and effectiveness. Now that seems to be kind of the accepted definition. Now I'd put something below that, which is in clinical, managerial and other processes. So it's not just the clinical, it's the managerial, it's the estates and facilities, it's every part of the organization. And when you look outside that particular organization, it's got to be how we coordinate and use technology to manage the system. And again, I think we'll probably be able to return to that later as well. Now, as Moritz said, there is a worldwide issue around recruiting workforce into health services across the globe. So I think whatever we do, and there is no right or wrong answer to this, so whatever we do in a smart hospital, has to make sure that we support the staff that we can recruit and retain in being as efficient and productive as they possibly can be. Now, that has a number of things that again sit below it, which is training staff so that they feel comfortable with the technology, which, to be perfectly honest, we don't necessarily always do in the NHS or other health systems. And the other point that sits with that as well is that is going to require a different shift in the capacity and capability of individuals, whether they're clinical, whether they're managerial, estates and facilities or other, to be able to manage this new technology to ensure that they get the best output of what's been handed to them. The corollary to that is that there needs to, with all these things, there needs to be an investment during the implementation of these projects, going in parallel with that training, to make sure that we do get the best out of it, rather than chucking a system in front of people saying, get on with it, and not being able to get the best out of it from that. So planning has always been one of my real driving forces throughout that 37 years of planning and leading hospital developments, is that the more planning you do up front and the more you understand it, the more you understand the implications, what the implications are on staff, the better result and output you'll get. So those are my challenges for discussion with the audience. As I say, I don't think there's any right or wrong answers to this, but what lies ahead definitely is how we look at the system. So making sure that if there is a healthcare system, that the technology enables that to manage its resources effectively. But we mustn't forget is that those who aren't yet digitally enabled or are hard to reach communities who can't necessarily access that system, they must never, ever be forgotten. And what we tend to do, I think, in the healthcare planning world and certainly the tech world, is just kind of forget those people. I come from a rural community in Yorkshire, and I think we got, I was born in 1963, and we had our first landline put in 1976. So I can't imagine that rural community of 8 houses where I grew up has got access to fast broadband, which allows, I don't know, because I haven't been back for a while, but I can't imagine they've got access to fast broadband as I have here in leafy middle-class Surrey, that allows people to have virtual consultations or to be able to log on to a patient portal in a health system or a hospital, and perhaps not even have 4G coverage for using an app on their phone. So we always need to be cognizant, and that will change over time, of those different needs of different populations in different areas. So that's my pitch.
Very good. Thanks, Dwayne. There's a lot of points there, and yeah, like you say, there's no exact right or wrong answer, but it's bringing together different challenges and solutions and how we can work together. And interesting on your last point there about digital access. In our experience, we've looked at a few options with clients in terms of using our single person rooms or pods to put them into areas such as libraries or areas like that. So those that are less digital enabled can go out to somewhere nearby and then tune in from there to their local hospital or wherever to have that access. So like you say, it's an important part of going forward, is making sure that we are including everyone in this journey. That's good. So I think touched on it a bit earlier, but in terms of obviously there's a lot of thought, or I guess there's a lot of challenges as well with the smart hospital development. I guess we've discussed some of those already, but what would you say is maybe sort of one thing? How do we make this successful in terms of going forward? How do we overcome some of those challenges?
If you don't mind, if I can go first, I think it comes back to that common currency. I think it's describing what a smart hospital looks like, and I think it comes back to those sort of levels of maturity that something like HIMSS did as an international standard, which sadly I think NHS England has now developed a slightly different standard, which isn't necessarily, the two don't necessarily line up in terms of levels of digital maturity. But I would say it's being really, really clear about what those are and describing what a smart hospital looks like in that context. So as well as all the internal clinical and managerial systems, from my interest, what does that mean for the building? What does that mean for the estates and facilities workforce? So how can you, as I said earlier, get the best out of the building to make it more efficient and productive by using all the information that's available to you across all those domains, and being really clear about what that is? Because I remember, and sorry to go anecdotal, but having a discussion with a major contractor some years ago about what levels of BIM actually meant, and therefore what as a client I needed. Now, I know I've trained on this and it's 40 years ago, but I've got a degree in astrophysics. And when I was reading the NHS standard for what BIM actually meant, I didn't understand a blinking word of it. It was a word salad on paper, and it went on for 40 odd pages, and I didn't understand a damn thing of it. So when I asked the major contractor and said, look, what do we need to get to BIM level 2? They said, well, what do you want? And I said, well, you're probably better placed to do that. Can you give me a clue? And they said, well, no, tell us what you want and we'll tell you if we can do it. And it became a very, very circular sort of Isha style conversation about what I wanted, what they could do. And, what I don't want us to see is getting into that conversation about smart hospitals. It's got to be really, really clear what it means, that there's different levels of digital maturity. And I think there is a piece of work to do there. So looking at what lies ahead, I think there's a real piece of work to do around what it actually really means, so that each individual organisation can then say, actually, we're at level 3 in that. So if we're doing a new hospital development, we need that bit. There'll be some organisations that are level 1 and say, goodness me, we need all this.
If I can add to that, Shane, and I think the point you made earlier, Joanne, is the how you would have explained the investment for a smart hospital technology to a client, to a board, and I think that's obviously one very significant point, because just really talking about the capital investment to implement a digitally enabled hospital, we talk about 10% of the capital cost. So that does not include things like training. So to put all this together, you need to really have a tangible benefit. And but more than that is for me the acceptance by, shall we say, the users. So if we can't change in a hospital the way people operate, then any system you put in there, no matter how expensive or how complex it is, will fail. And again, I can only relate to my very recent work down in Greece, where we have certain doctors, they keep the paper files in their drawers because their experience is that the system is not reliable. That for them it means they're losing systems, they're losing information. We've been shown in northern Greece, we've been shown patient record storage, which is half the size of a football field in a basement, filled to the top with patient folders, which have to be kept legally for 25 years. We asked the hospital administration, can you get any, if you look for a particular patient, can you get any information out of it? And they said, no, it's not categorized, it's not cataloged. So really the way and the benefit needs to be explained, but also it needs to be obviously a reliable system. So the moment people feel that it creates them more work, or it is not reliable, or they need to have, I think we mentioned in our pre-discussion the other day, where you need 4 or 5 passwords to get into Epic or other systems, work on that basis, fingerprint technology, face recognition, get instant access for users. So all these steps, I think it's important. The other thing, the other challenge that we come across very regularly is obviously and is the how should we call it, the hardware. Yeah. So at the moment, and again, this is all changing now. We have obviously with a lot of portable device technology, but still. Where we are designing hospitals, we see the dreaded cow, the computer on wheels, which is a monumental trolley with a laptop fixed to the top, and it needs to be charged, it needs to be pulled to the bedside, and the wards are full of this. So what that means is that just in a congested intensive care environment, you add this to it, and you start losing people's willingness to make best use of it. So we've been looking at part of some developments, looked at ways of having a bedside monitor that sits on an arm or coming off a pendant, which can be used for the data entry by the nurse, can be used during the ward rounds, and with a flick of a switch, you can change to a patient profile, and they can use that for WhatsApp or Zoom to speak to their relatives. And I think that's something that a lot of hospitals did during the COVID pandemic, where they handed out tablets to the patients. But in reality, this is one aspect of the smart hospital, and I think Dwayne is right. We need to get that definition right, and just to throw in a buzzword and say it's a smart hospital. If you put together a business case, you need to be very specific. What's the benefit of it? And we've seen, I think it was in the news very recently, Birmingham City Council has gone bankrupt because part of it they've invested hundreds of millions in an IT system which was not fit for purpose. So I think there's a lot of aspects there. I think it comes down to a change, because arguably there's no way around it. Smart technology is here to stay. Data collection, data processing is getting easier, it's getting cheaper, it's getting more advanced. So it's happening. It's really how can we manage the impact of it, and all these discussions around AI and what it does, and are we being taken over by technology. I think it's very important in an environment like a hospital where not just the elderly generation, who are maybe not that digitally enabled, but where people really feel like they're being recorded, they're being tracked, they're being traced. So how do we deal with all this? So I think in order to implement a system that's successful, we have to get, first of all, the staff on our side. We have to get people involved from the get-go when we start designing these hospitals. How will you operate? How will you? And a bit of it is a crystal ball. I mean, we now designing hospitals that will use technology in 25 years time, and what will be the change there. But again, coming back to that common currency, and I've had a lot of work involved with some of our IT consultants who are supporting us on that sort of HIMSS implementation, which is actually quite a good model, because it sets out an international recognized route map coming from across 7 levels to a fully paperless hospital. So the end game is a fully paperless, fully digital enabled hospital. And I think there's about 4 NHS trusts in the country who are at HIMSS level 7. So a lot of work to do and a lot of pitfalls. But again, I think it's here to stay.
I think that's I think that's absolutely right. And sorry, Shane, to take some of your thunder, but I'm just looking at some of the comments in the chat, and Russell's asked a question about looking to the centre to prescribe outputs. Having lived through the National Programme for IT and other national programmes, the centre prescribing outputs is possibly slightly inadvisable. I think what would be helpful, and your suggestion about an HTM or an HBN that looked at this, I think actually would be helpful, as long as it's not so prescriptive that people, or technical, that people find it difficult to navigate. And, you know, to pick up another point about stifling innovation and development, it's got to be a living document that moves. It can't be something that we publish as an NHS and then say, oh, we'll come back to it in 7 years, because that's just bonkers, because things move so quickly. I mean, you know, my phone has moved very, very rapidly since I bought my first smartphone in 2012. So that's 11 years. And it's gone from something that was good to something that is, you know, I mean, the tech in these is more than the computers that sent man to the moon, in terms of storage, in terms of processing power. You know, that it's just the way that things have developed over the years. And you know, IT isn't my area of expertise. When I speak to IT people, like I speak to clinical re-engineering people, when I speak to change management people, when I speak to contractors, anyone else, because I'm a hideous generalist, it's all just word salad, unless it means it can be demystified and can mean something. Because otherwise, how can I explain that to my board? Most of whom will be generalists and have got a limited bandwidth to understand these things. So yeah, financing is another discussion, Russell, but I think there does need to be some general guidance, sadly, from the centre, that says a smart hospital could have the following attributes at different levels of development, depending upon the maturity, and then keep updating that, because, you know, it should be that feedback loop, you know, plan, see, act, do kind of thing, and then review. But we don't do that. We tend to publish things and then go, oh yeah, we published that, and then come back to it a few years later and go, did it work? Well, oh no, there was loads of structural problems with it. Oh, we'll redo it again, and it gets published 2 years later. So these things need to be a little bit more agile. And I agree with John Kelly around and hi John, around an integrated strategy certainly across an ICS, that is then either cascaded up or cascaded down, for, you know, depending upon how they actually work this through, with all those things integrated, is absolutely essential. And to try them, you can do them separately, but at some point you've got to bring them all together and say, what does this actually really mean across the whole health economy?
But even at trust level or at the macro level, I think this integration is very important, and it's actually a very good point, because often the IT strategy is developed in a silo, and it doesn't really, it looks at the possibilities and what can we implement, but what is actually the output, what's the end game of all this. So we're looking at, quite rightly, as John says here, we're looking at the staff, the workforce. What does it do for the workforce? What does it do for the clinical strategies? How are they affected? And I think at the very best, this becomes sort of a holistic strategy and approach to a system which benefits everyone. But the reality is, and the not too distant past has shown, that things like electronic patient records, I think there were billions spent and gone down the drain, and it was, from, again, I'm not an IT specialist, but from what I understand, it was just developed by some specialists, IT consultants, remote from reality.
Very good. No, I'm not an IT expert either, so I can't comment too much, but absolutely agree. And I think we've seen some of the same challenges with the work we've done, and I guess one of the biggest challenges we've been trying to help us is with that change management, which I think is another topic in itself. But I was thinking more about how, in terms of smart hospitals, I think we touched on it before we met, but around how they fit within the wider infrastructure and location, that kind of thing. Some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there, Shane, that yeah, you've got a smart hospital, but as I said earlier, it's got to be within a smart system. So you've got to have all these things joined up. Now, sometimes joining up all those different information systems can be quite tricky, because not a lot of them talk to each other terribly well, and certainly I've seen that over the years, that an EPR in an individual hospital trust doesn't necessarily talk terribly well to the information system held at a slightly higher level that would give you that integrated data collection to look at where the efficiencies are. So I think until you've got until the ICSs are more mature and have got, I keep saying until, but each individual health system needs a degree of maturity to be able to look across the whole system and to say, this is how we're going to do it. And actually, and this is a political point, with small p, you'll be pleased to hear, is that having that stability across health systems and across the healthcare architecture, and I mean that in terms of organizational and governance structures, would be quite helpful for some years, to allow systems and individual organizations to have the headspace to make that, to develop that maturity, without suddenly having to just pull up everything by the roots that was done 2 years ago. And I agree with John as well. Maybe the centre could disseminate good practice, smart examples that have. I think demonstrable benefits realisation is key. On the last project I was working with, we did scratch around for what benefits realisation actually meant about some of the digital enablement. And there wasn't a great deal of good practice or other examples that you could go and follow. Sorry, this sounds like the great I am, but it isn't. But we were one of the first hospital projects in Brighton to put together the demonstration of what monetization of non-financial benefits would be, in terms of those things that would contribute to the cost-benefit ratio. So the cost versus the potentially realizable benefits in either monetary or non-monetary terms. And I've got to say the evidence around this is really, really quite sketchy, because there doesn't seem to be a central repository, and I'm choosing that word very carefully, of information where you can say, if we make this intervention in this way, digitally or whatever, what is the potential output or the ranges of output that then you can use to inform future investment decisions? And it's that piece of post-project evaluation, benefits realization. So I completely agree with John, is that that evidence is not always apparent to us. Those of us who've been working in the service, and now that I'm not in the service, it's even more impenetrable.
And I think just with my architect's hat on here to take on Alexandru's point, I think that's exactly sort of the statement I made right at the beginning. So what we need to look at is what smart technology can do to benefit the functional. How can it reduce the footprint of the hospital to start with, and how does it impact on the capacity planning? And I think again, it's the crystal ball. We don't necessarily know how we're going to operate technology-wise in 20-25 years. I mean, I'm still waiting for the flying cars that I think we've seen illustrations in the 1980s. But the reality is that, and again, a big mantra of ours is the design must be flexible, the hospitals must be adaptable. And again, looking at that, and we've done, I mean, our firm has done this for the last 60 years, is looking how can we generalize, how we can create rooms that can evolve. And I think looking at that at a sort of a broader level in terms of the hospital building, I mean, certainly what we know is that and now just talking about general hospitals, the acuity of patients will increase. Yeah? So whilst the demographic development, we're seeing more and more elderly patients with multimorbidities. So I think using outreach opportunities like video consultation, etc., our hospitals should in the future ideally be reduced to hot, complex case functions like intensive care, elective surgeries, emergencies. What does that mean? It of course also means with the acuity going up, there is more and more demand on the complexity of digital technology. So again, here really the plea for forward thinking, and often, of course, budgets are here now in 2023. We're still dealing with the fallout from the price increases, inflation costs. So flexibility in design comes at a cost. But looking at the rapid advancement of technology, I think smart buildings need to be not smart only in its digital enablement, but it needs to be smart in its adaptability in terms of the bricks and mortars. How can that be smart? How can it be reduced? So again, there's an element that I think a smart building is a flexible building.
I tend to agree with that, actually, and to pick up the other point of Alexandru's comment, some of the experience that I've seen recently, and I was working at West Herts when the team there, Andrew Barlow and his team, were setting up the virtual wards, and really, bearing down on what other clinical conditions could potentially be used apart from respiratory on the back of COVID. That they seem to have presented evidence, and they are quite good at publishing this, that probably it takes away about 10% of your inpatient requirements. So they're saying about 90 beds, and Watford's got about 900, or just under 900. Now, that's one thing, because that will go towards a certain number of clinical conditions that are appropriate to be managed outside hospital, and you've always got to take the clinical risk about that. Now, the other thing I'd say is, if you're trying to predict 25 years forward, or even 3 years forward, or 5 years forward, or 10 years forward, then I would love to meet you, because when we look at all the different things that have happened to society and to healthcare over the last 10 years, I can guarantee, this is something I can guarantee, that in the next 10 years there will be something unexpected. Maybe not a pandemic, it might be technology, it could be another pandemic, it could be, another condition like HIV/AIDS, which when I was starting in the NHS was incurable and is now seen as a chronic disease, but still needs managing. We look at an aging population and what the comorbidities are within an aging population, and what support they will need, because to a certain extent that is somewhat uncharted territory, because a few cold winters used to kill off in the 1970s. When I was growing up, a few cold winters used to kill off the oldies, even if they had comorbidities. So we are into slightly uncharted territory on that front. So coming back to Moritz's point about flexibility, it's when you're looking at a hospital, whether it does need to be smart to be efficient and effective. It's making sure that you've got the flexibility for adaptability, but the flexibility, if you need it, to be able to scale up even further, depending upon the clinical need at the time, because there will be, and this is an absolute certainty. What it will be is not a certainty. There will be unexpected health needs still within our lifetime. And some of that, John, could be jetpacks failing and crashing to Earth. So a few more major trauma centres, perhaps.
Good, thanks, Dwayne. Sorry, I was conscious of time. We've slightly gone over, but it's been a very good conversation, so I don't want to cut it short. So thanks for all those that are still joined on. And I definitely echo that point you've just been talking about. Adaptability and flexibility has definitely been a big trend within our workspace work as well. So, and in terms about disruptions, sort of 10 years ago or so was when we saw a big change in workplace design in terms of the likes of Google and their workspace. Other clients wanted their talent they were attracting. So the challenge was, how do we create these workspaces? Now the challenge has been, how do we actually attract people back into the office? And obviously a lot of stakeholders are worried about the future in terms of doing shorter leases, that kind of thing, and even pulling out, as you've probably seen in the news. But with the work we've done with clients, it ultimately has been around, how do we create a flexible estate so as things change, they can change with it. So I think that mirrors across into the healthcare what we've done as well. So conscious comes to end of time. So any last final tips of advice from either of you to round us off?
The future is always uncertain, and don't see it as certainty. Look at what the plausible scenarios could be around. If you've got a central assumption around what digital, what other thing, virtual clinics, everything else could be, if you've got a central assumption, look at what the spread is around that if those assumptions don't come to light. And let's just be really, really careful as clients, as designers, as anyone else within the ecosystem that looks at new hospital projects. Let's not just narrow down to that single thing too quickly, and look at what the spread and the sensitivity is around those assumptions, what the best case could be and how you deal with that, and what the absolute worst case could be and how you deal with that.
And never ever forget, it's obviously is the term benefits realization, but never ever forget to continue to ask, why are we doing it? What does it do? And not just because it says smart on the tin, it must be good. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Good. Thank you very much, Dwayne and Morris. A very good conversation, very insightful. There will be a recording available afterwards, so anybody's missed any bits. Otherwise, thanks all for joining and have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all ever
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thanks.
That's been brilliant. I really enjoyed that.
Bye.
Thank you.